Good evening, Commanders, and welcome to Algorab AM. I'm your host, Commander IFlippaDaSwitch, and this is your one-stop shop for all your needs when it comes to Sidewinder Syndicate, the Algorab system, Orbs Terminal, Elite Dangerous, and everything the Great Wide Galaxy has to offer. So this week, we have quite a bit going on, actually. We just got done fighting a war in the Palin system, which we won, by the way. So to all you commanders that went out there and decided to lay down some lead in the name of Algorab and Sidewinder Syndicate, I do appreciate it. Of course, this will lead inevitably to more encounters in the BGS, but for now, we can say that we're going to take that W. Thank you. And aside from that, a lot of people, gearing up for different activities and things like that. A lot of different events and everything coming up, which is great. We have so much going on in the squadron, and I think that is great. I mean, it definitely shows that this squadron is alive and thriving, and we're just out here kicking ass and taking names, and it's pretty freaking nice. But today's episode is a little special because we have a friend of the squadron that goes by Phil, and he is a part of the Post Disaster Evacuation Service, and a lot of what he is talking about is pretty freaking cool in my opinion. I myself was not able to interview him. Luckily, Commander MonoHive was able to step up for us and take care of that interview and did a pretty damn good job. So be on the lookout. That guy is going to be an up-and-coming host here on the show. But before we get into the interview, I just want to say that we're going to be having a whole lot going on in the squadron and in the different places the squadron has its snaky little fingers, if snakes had fingers. But I do have a special announcement that I want to make, and that is that myself, Algorab AM, is going to be partaking this year in Extra Life, the Extra Life charity stream, which will be taking place on the 7th of November. 7th November, I will be streaming live on Twitch here in the Algorab studio, and we are gonna do a 24-hour live stream. I am, of course, going to invite any Sidewinder Syndicate commanders that want to hop in and join us to, come along, and we'll be playing a variety of things. We're not going to be playing just Elite. I will be playing quite a bit of Elite, though, but I also have some other games and some activities and stuff planned out for it. There will be more information on it before the actual live stream itself, but mark your calendars, 7 November. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. We're raising money for the Children's Hospital in Vanderbilt. They're in Nashville, Tennessee. Very near and dear to my heart. It is a charity that I strongly believe in and definitely a great cause. So tell your friends, come on out and donate. Make sure you check out the stream and everything, and it's going to be really rad. But enough about that and enough about me. Let's get on to this interview with Phil and Commander MonoHive. Take it away, boys.
Hey, this is MonoHive. Thanks for tuning in. I'm here with Phil P. Apart from being an intrepid explorer, he also seems to have an endless amount of knowledge about the Elite universe. Thanks, Phil, for taking the time to talk to us. Could you please take a minute to introduce yourself and also maybe tell us a little bit about how you got into Elite?
Phil, I'm with the squadron, the Post Disaster Evacuation Service. I've been playing Elite on and off since just before Horizons came out. I got it on early access. I wasn't right in at the start, but when it came on early access on Steam, I bought it. I got something like 15% off for doing that. And because the game wasn't out yet, I forgot about it. So I bought it and I forgot about it, because I thought, right, well, the day it's out for download, it's mine, but that's months away. So for ages, I just forgot all about it. And then all of a sudden, I'm seeing adverts come out for Horizons. And I thought, oh yeah, I've got this, haven't I? I haven't played it yet. So then I started playing it just before Horizons.
And what drew you to Elite? Was it that you had played the original game, and was it memories from that?
Some of it was nostalgia because I did play the original game. I am one of the older players, so I'm 56. And I did play the original game in 1984 on the Commodore 64 after seeing it on my friend's BBC Micro. I just went round his house one day and he was playing it, and straight away, that was it. Imagination captured.
You know, I've seen footage of the original game, but I can't comprehend what it must have been like to actually see and experience that back in the day.
Well, it's all there out on YouTube. You can watch playthroughs of the original. You can play the original yourself on DOSBox. You know, you can get a BBC Micro port or a Spectrum port or a Commodore 64 port. You can play them on an emulator. You can play the original games. I mean, Drew Wagar does playthroughs of the first 3 games quite often and streams it, you know, for all the retro gamers. And it's a legacy. It's not just a game, it's a legacy.
It's quite mind-boggling to think that an experience somebody had with a video game so many decades ago could have such a lasting impact on someone's imagination.
It's difficult to get across the impact that the original game had on people at the time. Home computers very much in their infancy. Graphics and sound and everything else, nothing like the almost photorealistic graphics that we have today, and intros to games that are like little movies in themselves, you know? There wasn't any of that. And so they were really pushing the envelope with what could be done with the power of the PC, the home PC as I think of it at the time.
And I believe the first game came out on the BBC Micro before you played it on the Commodore 64. And I had not heard of this machine until I started playing Elite. And I started hearing about people who had originally played the game on this machine. And that's when I realized there was a line of computers that came out during this time that I didn't know about, but were historically quite significant.
There was an actual program on the BBC where they looked at home computing in general, because I mean it really started with like the ZX80 and then the ZX81, and then the first home computers started coming in, like the Acorn Atom was the forerunner to the BBC Micro, because all the BBC Micro was a rebranded Acorn Electron, which was the successor to the Acorn Atom. So the Acorn Atom and the VIC-20 came out, and then you got a glut of home computers. You got the BBC Micro, the rebranded Acorn Electron, you got the Commodore 64, you got the Sinclair Spectrum, the Tandy, the Amstrad, and then later on, you know, you had the next wave of home computing with more power, the 16-bit machines, the Ataris and the Amigas and the Acorn Archimedes, and that all kind of escalated for about a decade, and then pretty much PCs came in, and for a start they couldn't really compete, but then sound started getting better and graphics started getting better, and they thought, and now, you know, we have PCs today which can be a gaming rig, a video editing suite, a sound recording studio, and all in one box. So this is how much power has been put in the home, and with that people's expectations have risen. But yeah, even back then with our 3.5k of RAM and loading in the game from tape, we could see the potential. I mean, if you take the first guns, they were terrible. Half the time they blew up in your face. You couldn't hit a barn door with 20 paces, and people are sort of looking at them going, what, these are supposed to replace the arrow? Yeah, right. Arrows don't tend to explode when you try and fire them. It's where the phrase flash in the pan comes from, isn't it? Because it's the gunpowder flashing in the pan but not firing the projectile. So flash in the pan is an idea that never works out. But people could see that with better engineering, better technology, better techniques, better design, they could see the potential of the idea. And now, when you go out and buy a gun, it's light years ahead of those first clumsy efforts.
So, from the perspective of someone who experienced the original game, you know, you're kind of an OG commander, so to speak. So, from that perspective, what did you expect to see in the new edition of Elite that came out in 2014?
So when you say about, you know, someone who's come from playing the original game, and I didn't play the 2 games that came after it, and basically had nothing to do with Elite for about 20 years, and then Elite Dangerous gets announced and, you know, reawakens my interest. Because first of all, I want to know how much it's actually going to bring in from other games. Is it going to be a sequel? Is it going to be a reboot? Is it going to be a bit of a retcon? Is it going to be a whole new thing? Or is it going to be some sort of combination of all those?
Right, of course. And you know, another thought that crosses my mind is considering the love the original game had and how that inspiration has persisted over the years. It explains a lot about the current player demographic.
You'll find that there is a massive middle-aged and late middle-aged demographic in Elite, because it's all those guys and girls who played the original game on their Spectrums and their 64s and their BBC Micros.
You know, and for a lack of a better word, I suppose because the player base is on average a bit more mature, the gaming community for Elite is a little bit more relaxed than, say, some other gaming communities?
I'll be damned if I'll be called mature. How dare you? I'm just well seasoned.
Okay, I didn't mean to offend you.
No, I'm only joking. I mean, this is the thing, though. I mean, generally, perhaps because it's an older demographic, I don't know. But yeah, maybe that's why I think the community as a whole is pretty laid back. You know, every other game has people who just want to kill each other as fast as possible. And for me, the true power of Elite, even when you're doing that, is in cooperative play. And in cooperative play, I think Elite has led the way. I don't think there's any other game that offers the potential for co-op play as Elite right now.
You know, I stopped playing games for nearly 15 years, and I jumped back into gaming with Elite only this year. And I have to say, I've had such an amazing time with the community and all the crazy cooperative ideas that they come up with. But now let's shift to some of the things that you're doing with your squadron, the Post Disaster Evacuation Service. How are your activities developing with the recent terrorist attacks and the Thargoid incursions and things like that?
Well, these terrorist attacks were new. And yeah, our squadron focuses on rescuing passengers and escape pods and other items from stations when they burn. And we've often sat and talked about what other kind of rescue operations we could do and incorporate into our activities. And this has led to a few discussions between us where we've generally agreed that the whole search and rescue mechanic needs a bit of an overhaul.
Okay, before we touch up on that, when the station fires started, we didn't know if it was Thargoids or terrorists, right? So the terrorist thing was, like you said, it was new. How did you react to that when it happened?
In the case of a Thargoid attack, which of course we all thought this attack was before we found out it was terrorists instead, you know, the corrosive damage was a very nice bit of sleight of hand to make us think it was the aliens back. And I remember that morning because, you know, they came back and it's like, oh God, the Thargoids are back. They've attacked. We've got corrosive damage on the stations. We've got them on fire. We've got rescue ships. We're back in business. Happy Thargs Day. And hang on a minute, it's not Thargoids. What the hell? And you got confused news reports throughout the day. And I love the way they handled that because, you know, the authorities initially thought it was Thargoids and put up that it was a Thargoid attack in Galnet. Then Galnet got revised as they got new information. And it was really nicely done, like it was happening in real time. I liked that.
Okay, so you mentioned that you want the rescue mechanic to have an overhaul. Could you elaborate on that? And do you think Odyssey will play a part in making it happen?
I think the new content in Odyssey will, from everything that I've seen of it, it will be an extension of what we can already do, whether that's combat, exploring, mining, trading, doing rescues. So I would hope that rescue operations would be a part of that, whether in the form of missions or special events. Maybe planet bases get attacked. Maybe we'll have to evacuate them one day. I don't have any doubt that the new content in Odyssey will be in line and be an extension of everything that we do already rather than a bolt-on. But what I don't know is what they'll do about aspects of it, such as search and rescue, because as I said, I mean, at the moment, unless there's a burning station, the only place you can hand in any escape pods or black boxes or anything like that that you might find maybe on a planet somewhere, then the only things you can do is hand them into the nearest search and rescue contact. Now, I tried to get some information on what that meant, what consequence that has doing that. Does it even do anything? This is where, although I'm full of praise for the things that FDev do, when it comes to communicating with a community, sometimes they really, really suck. I asked them several questions about the effect that rescues had, the effect that handing things into search and rescue has, and got no answer. Didn't even get an acknowledgement, just got blanked. So I had to find this sort of stuff out from other players. And so piecing it together as best as I can tell, the search and rescue contact doesn't really do very much. I mean, anything you hand in there, you get peanuts for. And I got told basically that they've made up some big abstract figure that every time you add something in through any search and rescue contact, any station, any base, anytime you do that, it just knocks a bit off this big abstract figure that nobody knows what it is. But what that actually achieves, or what will happen if a certain target is hit, no idea whatsoever. So It's just this sort of big abstract thing that doesn't seem to be connected to the universe in any way. And so I think they need to make a lot of the search and rescue mechanics more integral to the game so that you can see that they have some kind of meaningful effect.
So I know that you've done some research into the current state of the mechanic and that you have some details about how it functions. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Out what rescuing passengers and escape pods and delivering commodities to the stations and everything. We've figured that out as much as it's possible to figure out. We know how the mechanics work. We know that in the case of a Thargoid attack, the system comes under the state of incursion, AX conflict zones appear, rescue ships appear, and the main station burns. On the rescue ships will be a mission board and a passenger board. And when the incursion is defeated, the mission board will close down and the passenger board will stay open. Now, this time in the terrorist attacks, I wondered what they would do with the mission board, because if it's a Thargoid attack, then the mission board will have missions such as bring us back 3 or 4 escape pods or black boxes or personal correspondence or whatever. But they'll also have missions like kill 8 Thargoid scouts or kill a Hydra or something like that. So at first, with these new terrorist attacks, there were only passenger missions. And there were escape pods to pick up, but there was only a basic search and rescue contact. And it took a few days. And then the mission board appeared, and the mission board had regular missions saying, bring us escape pods, bring us black boxes. And, you can take 4 black boxes to a search and rescue contact, hand them in, and get 20,000. Or on the rescue ships, you can pick up a mission saying, bring us back 3 escape pods, and they'll pay you 150,000. So rescuing passengers and rescuing escape pods and handing them in at the mission and passenger boards on rescue ships is decent money, a very good way to build up fast rank with the Empire or the Federation, which is why a lot of people use them. A lot of people rescue for Federation aligned, they want a Federation aligned station so that they can grind for the Corvette, because that's always the harder of the 2 unlocks. That's always the one that takes longer. It always takes longer to unlock the Corvette than it does to unlock the cutter. So, but even from our point of view, even if all people want to do is grind Federation or Empire rank, that's fine. We don't care. It all contributes. They're rescuing people. They're handing them in. As far as I'm concerned, their motives for doing it can be money. They can be to get a Corvette. They can be whatever the hell they want. The point is that you're getting people to contribute. And again, it's a cooperative activity that I think they need to expand on and, just make that whole rescue mechanic more meaningful so that when the Odyssey content comes out, we will get missions that are directly related to those activities, I mean, I know that at the moment, if you go into these Empire systems where people are trying to escape, there will be a lot of refugee missions on the passenger boards. So they are starting to think about things like this and put them in. And while it's not specifically what we would do, I have said to the squad that if they wanted to do a bit of role play, they could go and pick up some refugees from these stations that are fleeing Empire tyranny and looking for safe haven in the Federation, which shows how desperate they are.
That's a whole nother can of worms.
From everything that I've seen, it's not just going to be a bolt-on, it is going to be an extension of everything you can do already. And so, obviously I'm hoping that there'll be more search and rescue opportunities that come with that, whether it's evacuating people from a planet base that's on fire. We've never had a planet base attacked before. Maybe that'll happen.
Oh yeah, I would totally like to see that happen. And it might be really cool if the planets that you did the rescues on had really high G as well.
An extra challenge, an extra challenge. Be careful when landing, because you do have to manually dock at a burning station. You can't auto dock. So it really will be a test of skill on 2 parts there, high G landing and getting in, rescuing as many as you can and getting out of Dodge. Maybe you'll even have ground vehicles to rescue them in rather than doing it in your ship. Who knows? Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have wondered if we're going to get new SRVs and stuff. Well, what if you could put together, I don't know, a rescue bus or something, drive into a building, pack everybody on it and drive out?
Oh yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I really hope they expand on the rescue mechanic. And from what I've seen, I think it's safe to assume that station rescues are something most players enjoy doing.
Yeah, there's 2 things you can get elite players to agree on. The sound is brilliant. Burning stations are brilliant. They argue about everything else, but everybody says those are good. We like the burning stations. We love the atmosphere. We like the challenge. It's good money. It's fun. It gives you that sort of feel-good factor when you role-play rescuing people. It's, a nice cooperative venture as well, although if you have too many people working a station, you tend to take jobs off each other. That's another part of the search and rescue mechanic that they need to address, really. I can go in my rescue Corvette and clear out a passenger board in 4 trips. Then you've got to wait 20 minutes for the board to refresh. So unfortunately, it's not very good for wing activity because you'll just end up taking jobs off each other. And between you'll just clear out the board even faster. And so unfortunately, it misses out on an opportunity to be more cooperative than it is. I mean, you can do things like I've winged up with someone and I said, okay, look, I'll do pods, you do passengers. But you have to avoid taking work away from each other. So again, this is another aspects of the search and rescue mechanic which I think they could work on to make it more of a cooperative venture and invite more people to do it.
Okay, first there were the terrorist attacks, then we had Thargoids, and before we get into conspiracy theory territory and all that stuff, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the Thargoids? Are they just inherently malicious, or are the attacks a failure on our part to communicate with them?
That's not the simple question that it sounds, because first of all, it depends a lot on what about the Thargoids they're going to carry forward from previous games, because the Thargoids were in the very first game, and then they didn't appear in the second game, and then they were back in the third game, and the third game had a very open-ended ending. And so in the first game, the Thargoids could pull you into witch space and attack you, witch space, hyperspace. And in the original game, you could force your frameshift drive to malfunction and jump you into witch space so you could fight the Thargoids and get the combat experience for killing them, and then jump to an anarchy planet where you would get attacked again anyway. And so what you would do is you would pick 2 systems that were near to each other. One were high-tech, selling something like computers or robotics, and you buy those. And then as long as the star you're jumping to is within half of your fuel range, which was only 7 light years, you could jump up to 7 light years without refueling in the original game. So if you picked another system that was within 3.5 light years, you could force a jump into witch space, kill all the Thargoids, go to the anarchy planet, kill all the pirates, dock, sell your computers for a mega profit, buy something like narcotics, and then do the same on the way back. And not only would you make up money both ways, but you would be farming the hell out of the combat experience you needed to eventually reach the rank of elite. So the Thargoids had the ability to pull you into witch space and attack you, or pull you out of witch space and attack you. And then the second game came along, Frontier, and the Thargoids had gone. Apart from the odd captured Thargoid ship that you could see at the planet base, there weren't any flying around, there weren't any attacking. They were gone. Where did they go? No explanation. They're just not there. Significant by their absence. So then the third game comes along, and we find out that the reason why the Thargoids are not around is because INRA, the INRA, an organisation which is composed of people from the Federation and the Empire, have been wiping them out. And so that's the first human and Thargoid war.
Yeah, you mean the mycoid virus, right?
This is the mycoid virus, yes. Now, in that third game, they introduced the new power of the Alliance, because up till then it was just the Federation, the Empire, or independent systems. So Frontier First Encounters brought the Thargoids back and showed that this shadowy, nasty organisation composed of people from the Federation and the Empire had developed this virus to wipe out the Thargoids. And then and this had already happened. The Thargoids were already infected. Now in the game, you get the chance to either bring them the cure or not bring them the cure. And so when Elite Dangerous came along, and in the codex and history and everything, it says, oh, yeah, there was a first Thargoid war. It's obviously referring to that one. And so what was going to be fascinating for me would be which bits would they carry on? Which bits would they stay with? Which bits would they ignore? Which bits would they retcon? So before answering the question of what the Thargoids are doing here and whether we could have done a better job of communicating with them. We've got to try and understand how much of the lore has been brought forward from previous games in the first place.
So how different are the Thargoids that we see now as opposed to the ones from the original game?
Now, in the original game, as you know, as probably everybody knows by now, the original game came with a little novel, a novella, called The Dark Wheel. And that introduced two concepts, Raxler and the Thargoids. Now, according to that short story, the Thargoids originally were two species, and there was a more warlike species and a more peaceful one, so we assume that the war is with the more warlike one. Since then, there's been no mention of two different species of Thargoids, so we don't know whether they're still using that idea or not. The Guardians tried to communicate with the Thargoids, and the Thargoids were having none of it and just attacked them. You know, they didn't want to communicate. Now, it seems that what happens, we don't know whether we're dealing with one or more species of Thargoids, so until we know further, let's just assume we're dealing with one. And let's not make any assumptions per se about whether they're naturally warlike, naturally peaceful, or whether there's just some big misunderstanding going on. Leaving that issue aside for one moment, what we know is that they will come to planets, they like ammonia worlds, and they come to planets and they seed them with barnacles, which then generate meta-alloys, which they use in their technology and to build their ships. So what had happened was that with the Guardians, the Thargoids are believed to be older than the Guardians. That's the first thing. They're a very, very old race. They're millions and millions of years old. They're around before we even existed. If you consider that the Guardians died out a million years before the human race existed, and the Thargoids are older than that. Now, it seems what happens is that is something that we know that Elite Dangerous is saying, because that's in the lore of Elite Dangerous. So we know that idea has been carried forward. And of course, the Guardians are new. They brought them in for this game. But the Guardians encountered the Thargoids. And what had happened, or what appears to have happened, as far as anybody's been able to piece together what happened a million years ago, who really knows, right? As far as anybody can put it together, what appears to have happened is that the Thargoids started seeding planets with barnacles, you know, presumably to harvest them later. And then they went off somewhere, maybe to harvest some, maybe to seed some more planets, maybe to harvest planets they previously seeded, maybe to do something else. We don't know. But what we do know is that the Guardians, meanwhile, evolved and grew and started occupying some of those planets where there were Thargoid barnacles. So when the Thargoids came back, they weren't dead pleased about a race usurping their barnacle forests, and they instantly attacked. There was no attempt to communicate. They just instantly declared war on the Guardians and started blowing them away. There was no attempt to negotiate. There was no attempt at diplomacy. They saw them on their barnacle patch and started firing. No questions asked. So if they already have that tendency, could we have communicated with them anyway? Maybe if we'd left the barnacle sites alone, they'd never have shot at us in the first place. But it's a bit too late to speculate about that now. Shots have been fired, and we've had one war with them already that has already happened. By the time Elite Dangerous begins, there's already been one Thargoid war.
Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, the first war was featured in Frontier First Encounters, and that's where the mycoid virus was used to fight them. So if that worked, why are we seeing Thargoids again?
The mycoid virus did work. It killed a lot of the Thargoids as well as disabling their ships. But it didn't wipe them out. They escaped. But it did drive them away. And to all intents and purposes, humans won, Thargoids nil. So the first Thargoid war ends with them being driven off. And if you want to know what happens with that, you can go and visit all of the INRA bases, which are in Elite Dangerous. And you can read the original logs about how the mycoid virus was found by accident as a byproduct of something else. It was a kind of fungus that was developed originally for some kind of agricultural purpose, but then somebody realized its potential as a weapon against the Thargoids, and then money and people and a lot of nasty experimenting on captured Thargoids and things like that resulted in the fungus being weaponized.
I haven't been to these places myself, but the Elite universe, while breathtaking, at the same time has a way of creating creepy and chilling atmospheres really well. So I'm looking forward to checking these sites out for myself.
They're genuinely creepy. I don't know how they've done it. Maybe it's because you know what's happened there, but I think even if you don't, you go there and they're just desolate and they're empty, and you start hearing these logs and you think, man, you know, these people were experimenting on captured Thargoids killing anyone who knew too much. This is shady as hell, yeah?
So, after people found out about what happened at the INRA bases, I'm pretty sure the organization had a fairly bad PR problem. Isn't the Aegis initiative essentially a rebranding of INRA?
The Aegis initiative, you know, when it all broke, the events of Jameson and the first Thargoid war, 200 years ago, but there was a huge scandal about it afterwards when the true role of INRA had been revealed, and a lot of people calling justice for Jameson and so on, you know. And so, yeah, Aegis set themselves up as a line of defence, but how effective they are, I don't know. But I don't know. I get the feeling that it was already pre-decided that the Thargoids were going to be aggressive to anyone who sort of invaded their barnacle fields was going to get shot at.
The lore sets up Thargoids to sound like a deadly enemy, but the way you describe them, they kind of just sound like angry barnacle farmers.
But I mean, I'm sorry, but you can't just plant seeds on a planet, go away for a few thousand years, come back, and then like blame another race for evolving there. It's kind of a little bit intolerant of them, really. But yes, are the Thargoids really space farming rednecks? Curious minds want to know. Get off my lawn. Is that all this is?
Okay, let's talk a bit about the BGS aspect of Thargoid incursions. Not to take the magic out of the gameplay, but are there more specific player actions that can drive the course of an incursion? And concurrently, are there indicators that could tell us where the next incursion could occur?
Have you heard about the Eagle Eye?
Yeah, that's the early warning array, right? Early warning system.
That's right. Yeah, well, that's normally the only way that we can detect if there's likely to be a Thargoid attack. 6 beacons dotted around the place which monitor for build-ups of Thargoid presences and then warn us about them. Now, normally, if the Eagle Eye says that there's been a heavy Thargoid build-up in such and such a system, that system will come under incursion a week later or maybe 2 weeks later. That is the only indicator we have of where and when the Thargoids may attack next. FDev have confirmed that going into those systems and killing as many scouts as you can stop the incursions happening. And that's where killing scouts over interceptors themselves becomes the priority. Once the incursion has started and a station has been attacked, anything goes, yeah? Kill scouts, kill interceptors, right up to hydras, just waste as many Thargoids as you can. But actually, due to some tests done by Canon and Hutton Orbital a few years ago, Hotfication it was called, there was a system burning which didn't have a high population, and so they rescued from there en masse without killing any Thargoids and found that rescuing passengers actually defeats the Thargoid incursion faster than killing the Thargoids themselves in the AX conflict zones.
That's fascinating. I'm surprised that this is the first time I'm hearing of it. Like, I'm currently really bad at combat in general, so it's good to know that I have an alternative way of involving myself in an incursion. Do you know other players who look at it the same way?
When we got new players coming in, I didn't want to give them information that wasn't correct or inaccurate in some way. So when they come in and they say, like, what effect does rescuing passengers have? It used to be a nightmare because all I could say was, I don't really know. I've been trying to get some hard and fast information myself on that. And it wasn't until very recently when I started doing Dart Wheel stuff, which we're also going to get to at some point, that Kaizen put me on to Atris, one of the guys from Canon. He was part of that original experiment between Hutton Orbital and Canon, where they had so many people doing rescues and tried to minimize the number of people actually fighting aliens in that system, so that even if there were 1 or 2 people doing that, they could be made statistically irrelevant by the number of people doing rescues and delivering commodities to the rescue ships like basic medicines and food and clothing.
Were these being delivered directly to the burning stations?
They didn't try delivering to the burning station itself, but it's reasonable to assume that would have the least effect. So when a Thargoid incursion happens, the most effective thing you can do is rescue passengers. The next most effective thing you can do is fight them in the AX conflict zones. The next most effective thing you can do is rescue escape pods and other items, or deliver commodities to the rescue ship and sell them through this commodity market there. And of the commodities that you can sell there, the one that seems to have the best effects is any kind of medicine, basic or advanced medicines, which also coincidentally make the most profit. So makes sense to do them anyway. And then, although we don't know what effect delivering to the actual burning station itself has, we would expect that to have less of an effect than all of the other activities.
I'm constantly impressed by the kind of work players put into figuring things out in this game. It's pretty mind-blowing. But now I'd like to move on to our next topic.
Can I just say at this point, one of the things that I've wanted to do, just before we move on to another subject, is the thing is fighting Thargoids, rescuing people, and repairing the stations afterwards have always been seen as kind of separate activities, and I've always seen them as the three different processes of the same activity, which is why I've always tried to encourage more cooperation between rescue squads, AX squads. You know, we're tied into a few of the AX guys now. We've got to know the anti-Xeno guys very well through doing rescues, you know, and a lot of them pop in and they keep us posted on what they're doing, and I'm on their Discord as well, so I see their announcements, and Operation IDA as well, you know. And I think that, yeah, you've got all these players doing these things, but I still think that these groups could be more coordinated than they are, and it's something that I try and push for when I can.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. I think that would be really cool if there was more synergy between these different gameplay systems and the players involved. Okay, so let's just shift gears a little bit here. What do you think about the current events with the Molinist refugees and the Empire behaving the way they are? What's your opinion? How do you feel about it?
What we're seeing now is that things haven't moved on a lot. We've got the Empire ready to attack anyone, saber rattling and harassing innocent people and arresting busloads of innocent people after the terrorists have already escaped in their Lamborghinis, and making damn fools of themselves, looking like angry kids lashing out because they don't know who hit them, you know, and not gaining a lot of sympathy with people. Going around calling people terrorists just for having a different political opinion doesn't tend to endear you to them. Arrogant bastard is probably more how you'd feel, you know?
Well, you know, every government thinks it's doing the right thing until, you know, stuff blows up in its face. I suppose only time will tell how this plays out. Wasn't the Federation behaving similarly before the whole Empire split happened?
And that's why they broke away in the first place, because they thought that the Federation had crossed the line from giving people the benefit of the doubt to being automatically accusing. And now the Empire has crossed that line itself. And, you know, it believes that it has the right to call anyone who believes in a certain political philosophy a terrorist, even if they're just some average Joe who goes to work every day, doesn't want to bomb anyone, doesn't want to kill anyone, doesn't support anyone else who does, and just votes differently.
There is already a lot of speculation that the Empire and the Federation are going to go to war. What do you think?
I don't know whether this is going to lead to a war between the Federation and the Empire, and you can go down all sorts of avenues with that one. What may happen there? I mean, on the most simple and obvious level, who would stand to gain from destabilizing the Empire and the Federation at the same time? The Alliance. Whether they're behind it or not, they certainly benefit from the Empire and the Federation being disabled, because they can just quietly grow their power and influence while the Federation and the Empire run around in headless chicken mode accusing each other of terrorism. You know, they can just quietly get on with expanding their power and influence and steal more of it from right under their noses.
Well, now that you put it like that, I mean, if not for the incursions, the Alliance is in a pretty good spot at the moment.
It's very handy, isn't it? Whatever's happened in the law before, it's very handy and very convenient that at the same time as the Empire gets attacked by terrorists, the Federation has a political scandal that might bring down the current president. Because whether Zachary Hudson had anything to do with it or not, enough people will think they will that he'll be denying it for the rest of his term in office. It doesn't have to be true. Enough people just have to believe it. That's how propaganda works. Stuff like this brings down leaders. You can imagine him being hounded by journalists now who don't want to talk about anything else. You know, were you responsible for Halsey's death? The fleet admiral who did it was a good friend of yours. I mean, so I saw that one coming, that somebody would use that information to bring down Hudson, whether he was part of it or not. So the question of whether he really intended to bump off his predecessor and take her place is now irrelevant, because if enough people think he did, it doesn't matter if he didn't. It'll be enough for him to lose the next election.
So what do you think? Do you think he did it?
The thing is, I've never really completely bought that Hudson did have anything to do with it because he didn't need to. Jasmina Halsey was already unpopular with the rest of the Federation government. Before she went away on Starship One, she was already unpopular and would likely have lost the next election. She'd become more sort of draconian and warmongering and ruthless and emotive in her language and condemning of others and intolerant. And there are enough people in the Federation, in the government and amongst the people who are just getting fed up with it, yeah? So it's highly likely that Jasmina Halsey would have lost the next election anyway. So all they really had to do if they wanted to get rid of her was wait for her to lose. Didn't have to bump her off, didn't have to kill her. So she decides to go out on this sightseeing or publicity stunt or whatever the hell it is she's doing on Starship One. And like the Antares before it, it vanishes on its first jump into hyperspace. And it's never heard of again. The Federation government, when she didn't return, declared a vote of no confidence in her. So that was nothing to do with Hudson. Unless, you're going to claim that he orchestrated that or knew it would happen. Yes, he presented himself as a candidate, but that wouldn't have been possible without the vote of no confidence from the Federation government in the first place. So it seems unlikely that he was able to influence the whole government to pick him. He could only present himself as a candidate and then be elected or not. So he gets sworn in, and all the conspiracy theorists get their tinfoil hats on and accuse him of murdering his predecessor. And because he doesn't immediately do a search for her, that only adds to the suspicion. And so, but he says, look, we don't even know where to start looking. She could be lost in hyperspace, or she could be anywhere in the galaxy. We don't even know where to start. It's not that we don't want to. It's not that we don't want to at all. But where do we even start looking? Then the wreckage of the Antares turned up. And then Zachary Hudson said, okay, well, now the wreckage of the Antares has turned up. It gives me hope that we might be able to find the wreckage of Starship One. And he started offering big money for anyone who could find any evidence of the ship. A community goal ran for that, where you were rescuing escape pods from salvage signal sources, yeah? And Halsey's pod was found. And due to her injuries, they induced a coma. And when she came out of the coma, when they brought her out of it, when her injuries were healed sufficiently for them to say, okay, you can bring her out now. When she came out, she said that she'd had visions, and she started talking about the caretakers of the galaxy and universal plans and weird stuff like this. Somebody obviously made sense of all of her ravings because it was due to what she said that the first Guardian sites were found. And that was pretty much at the beginning of the game in Elite's history. Yeah, so this is another little bit of history for those people who might not know that bit. And so the first Guardian sites were found. Now, Halsey herself expressed no interest in getting back into Federation politics, and she eventually moved to Alliance space. And that was that. She didn't contest Hudson's presidency. She didn't want a job back. She just left and she went to live in Alliance space, saying that she was done with politics and yada yada. And there were other concerns, and, then Thargoids attacked the bubble again and people had other things to worry about, so that was pretty much the end of it.
So apart from the many things you do in the game, you're also part of the Turn the Wheel initiative. Could you tell us a little bit about the Dark Wheel and Raxela and how all that's connected to the initiative?
So the Dark Wheel, in the original game, they were a faction, a kind of secret squadron looking for a place called Raxela. And the story, The Dark Wheel, that comes with the original Elite game is basically about a young guy who gets recruited into the movement, and there's bits about that, and there's bits about the Thargoids in there. I can't remember all the details, so it's been a long, long time since I read it, but I think you can find it as a PDF somewhere if you want to give it a read. But it introduces the idea that they were looking for this place called Raxela. What is Raxela? Well, it's a gateway. What it's a gateway to, we don't know. It could be a gateway to other galaxies. It could be intergalactic travel. It could be other universes. It could be other dimensions. It could be a way for us to increase our jump range. But again, what really put the cat amongst the pigeons was Brabham saying that Raxela was in Elite Dangerous. Now, you got to really, really listen to the actual wording that people use and the assumptions that people will come to. And FDev know damn well that players are going to leap to every possible conclusion that you can leap to on any statement they give. So if he says Raxler is in the game, you're going to get people who think, okay, there's a place called Raxler. The end. It's nothing special. And there's going to be people going, oh, wow, it's a gateway to another universe. Let's go. And he never said any of that. All he said was, Raxler is in the game. Nothing about what it is. Nothing about what it does. It doesn't necessarily follow that because it's in the game that it is this mythical gateway spoken about in the original story, or even that it has any significance at all. That is pure player assumption. So it could just all be a wind-up. It could just all be the Elite Dangerous version of the Maltese Falcon. You never do actually see it. It's just a MacGuffin to keep everybody looking for it. So first of all, most people who get wrapped up in the idea of what Raxler is, where it may be, how it might be found, and what it might be able to give us, very rarely ask themselves the question, what if it's all just a wind-up? So, yeah. What if it doesn't actually mean anything and you're just being strung along,
Yeah, but everybody likes stories like that. I mean, that's why myths like Atlantis have endured for so long.
Yeah, we've all got I want to believe written on our shirts. I want to believe. We are all Mulder from the X-Files. We've got I want to believe Raxler is really out there. I want to believe that it really is something.
So coming back to the initiative, you're hoping to expand the Darkwheel faction out of Shinrarta Desra. What's the goal here? Is it just to find Raxler, or is there something else that you'd like to see happen?
Well, first of all, the basic plan, because a lot of people, they think it's just about finding Raxler, or, which, if that happens, that's great, but it's not really primarily what the Turning the Wheel initiative is all about. There are people who've come in and said, oh, so this is to find Raxler, is it? And it's sort of, well, that's part of it, but it's not the driving force per se.
Okay, that's interesting because, on the surface, it does sound like it's all about Raxler.
Yeah, well, that's the first misconception to disabuse anybody of. If we find it, great, but the primary purpose is not to specifically find Raxler. There is not just one aim. Okay, there is not just one objective. And on the list of objectives, Raxler is kind of on it, but not a big priority as such. Yeah, we'd like to uncover more information about it. Yes, it would be nice if doing this did that. But the first thing to say is that nobody is expecting anything to actually happen, but to understand what they do want from it. Just a quick bit of history. The Darkwheel exists as a faction in Elite Dangerous. They exist in Shinrarta Desra. And up until a couple of years ago, till about, say, 6 months before Distant Worlds 2, they were in Shinrarta Desra, and they were just a faction in there. Were they just a nod? Just a reference for fans who would get it? Yeah? Or was there more to it than that? And then I think it was a 3.3 patch, which would make it about 6-8 months before Distant Worlds 2. Something happened, and an update resulted in the Darkwheel suddenly moving out of Shinrarta, still being there, but moving out of Shinrarta into LFT 926 and becoming a minor faction there. And at the time, a few eyebrows were raised about it, and because there'd been no sign of an expansion or anything, no clue that it was going to happen, it was put down to being a bug, and a few eyebrows were raised at it, but the Thargoids were attacking the bubble. There were other concerns, yeah? And it wasn't until recently, this year, when I guess people were sitting around kicking their heels with no invasions going on, no stations burning, everybody just waiting for fleet carriers to come out. And they'd said that the second bug fix was going to be rolled into the fleet carrier update, which I found a very positive thing because it gave me hope that they'd really got on top of the bugs that they said they were going to fix, which I think to a large extent they have. But yeah, these bunch of players got together and said, all right, well, hang on. We know that if you try and do missions for the Darkwheel in Shinrarta, you can raise their influence for a bit, but then as soon as you stop, it just plummets again. And if you look at the system map in Shinrarta Desra, you will see that the Pilots Federation is the controlling faction. Then you've got 4 other factions there, of which the Darkwheel is one, and they all have an influence score next to them, given as a percentage. Now, there is no influence score for the Pilots Federation. Therefore, that system is devlocked, so the Pilots Federation will always be the controlling faction there. It cannot be affected by influence. The 100% is shared out amongst the other 4 factions. But in LFT 926, that wasn't the case. All of the factions in LFT 926 had a percentage of the influence, including a Dark Wheel, which was one of the minor factions, and near the bottom of the 6 or 7 factions that were there, it was in like position 5 or 6 or whatever. But then a bunch of players from various walks of life decided to get together and say, hey, we can't affect things in Shinrarta, but now that, you know, the cat's out of the bag kind of thing, the Dark Wheel's out of the bag, how about we do missions for them, grow their influence as a faction, see if we can get them to become the controlling faction in LFT 926, and then see if we can get them to expand out of there, just like any other minor faction. Once it's out of Shinrarta, will it behave the same way as any other faction in terms of the ability to influence it, the ability to make it expand, the ability to make it take over other systems and grow its influence there? Will it follow the same rules as manipulating any other minor faction in the BGS? And so they put a plan together where they would try and expand them out of LFT 926 in, well, 3 directions if they could. In the direction of Sol, in the direction of Lave, and in the direction of Robigo, although the third one was more of a sort of wish list rather than a serious effort. The main effort has been in expanding towards Sol and towards Lave. And so the Turning the Wheel initiative started. Initially, we were growing the influence of the Dark Wheel by doing missions for them, fighting wars against factions it came into conflict with. And eventually, after about 2-3 weeks, the Dark Wheel became the controlling faction in LFT 926, upon which then you want to raise its influence to 75%. So if you can do that, then you can make it expand into another system. Now, it may expand into a system where there's a spare slot, or it may expand into a system where there is a faction in retreat. So they worked out a plan that we would expand basically by invasion. So there are 2 parts to the Turning the Wheel initiative in simple terms. The first part is to grow the influence of the Dark Wheel in the systems where it is by doing missions for them, by handing in combat bonds and, you know, various other activities to help them grow their influence. And that's an ongoing thing in all the systems where they exist. And to expand along a planned route to Sol and to Lave, and we've managed to do that. We've expanded several times, and we're now within striking distance of both those systems. The way that we do this is that when you expand out, it could be anywhere in a 20 light year cube from your current location. So where you expand to is also being controlled. So that's why I said it's a 2-part process, because you have people trying to grow the influence of the Dark Wheel in the systems where they exist, but we've also got people preparing the nearby systems so that when we expand into the system that we have planned to expand into, and we don't expand into a system that we don't want to because it will be going in the wrong direction or whatever. Yeah, the preparation works by going to nearby systems and finding a system that you want to expand into that is in the direction that you want to go, where there is a non-native faction, because native factions can't be kicked out of the system. So you're looking for a non-native faction that is in retreat, or that could be forced into retreat, which means having 5% or lower. And then you go and influence that faction by taking missions for them and failing them, or working for the people who are opposing them, or if they're in a war or an election, then you do missions for the other side to ensure they lose, and eventually you push them down into a state where they are in a state of retreat, and it's timing as well, so you've got to get the timing right. So you're looking around for systems that are in retreat, and if they're in retreat but they're in the wrong direction, you might actually go and help them, keep them out of retreat until you've expanded. And then the one that you do want to expand into, you put that faction in there, that minor faction, that minor non-native faction, into retreat. And then at the point where you expand, they're in retreat. and you jump into the system and go to war with them. You win the war against them and they get kicked out of the system and you take their place. So every single expansion done on the Turning the Wheel initiative so far has been a planned invasion.
It's insanely mind-boggling that players are able to organize themselves to such a high degree. Honestly, like, some days it's impossible for me to organize a Zoom call with people, but the fact that they're managing to do this, it's really, really amazing.
There are some very, very clever guys and girls.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Interestingly, I also think that for players who are interested in BGS, but don't necessarily want to support a faction or something like that, this might be a cool way to get into it and just learn about how it works.
Yeah, well, to people like that who want to experience it, I would say, join up, and then you could just do things like, so for example, at Anyan Wu, you have a compromised navigation beacon. And so you could go there, blow away a few bad guys, pick up a few Dark Wheel bounties, and then go to another system where the Dark Wheel are and go and hand them in at that station just to help them out, because they're still trying to become the controlling faction in that system. So you go and farm some bounties in a system where they are in control, and you go and hand them in a system where they aren't to help grow them, and then go there and just do a few missions for them, do a bit of cargo, do a few data runs, a few donations, a few passenger missions, and get a feel for what it's like and how much work is involved to grow a faction and keep a faction. And I think it would be a valuable thing for people to do, especially if they're thinking of becoming a player faction and asking to be placed in the game as a player faction. It sounds like a great idea until you realise how much work you have to do to keep your system and stop it falling into infrastructure failure or a war or a blight or another player faction.
Yeah, and to think that we have players who are putting those efforts into a non-player faction, that's really something.
But I mean, I'm indebted to Kaizen and cryptography and the other clever guys and girls, who've put this initiative together for capturing the interest of the players and giving them something to do. And I think you've made a very valid point that for anybody who wants to get into the background gaming system and understand what it's about on any level, whether they just want to casually indulge with it and get a feel for what it's like to do BGS work, or whether they want to seriously get into it and understand the concepts behind it, the Turning the Wheel initiative is a good initiative to join up with, where a lot of people will be happy to probably bend your ear off telling you all about like what affects what and why and how and all the whys and wherefores of it. And once again, like everything else in Elite, you will be bombarded with information by lots of friendly, helpful and wonderful people.
That is awesome. On most days, I have to really, really think to decide what I'm going to be doing in the game, because I have so many options and I feel like every day that list grows bigger and bigger. And honestly, man, this interview was meant to be a lot shorter. I haven't even got through most of my questions. I'm going to have to do this with you all over again for another episode.
There's a lot to get through, I know. I mean, it is difficult with a game this complicated. There are so many factors, and you ask what sounds like a simple question, but it's not a simple question because there's so many aspects to this game. I think it just goes to show that anybody who still thinks that this is only a mile wide and an inch deep after listening to us going on about how many different aspects there are to everything, if nothing else, perhaps we've disabused people of the notion that it's a mile wide and an inch deep, because even the apparently simple things get pretty involved once you get into the whys and wherefores of how you do it, why you do it, and what else it affects.
Thank you so much, Phil. We're going to have to wrap this up now. I'm looking forward to talking to you again, but that's all we have for this episode. And with that, I'm going to hand this back to Switch. We're going to have Phil on again for the second part of the interview, where he'll be talking about his exploits as an explorer.
All right, and we're back, and man, that was an amazing interview. It actually kind of blows my mind, all the stuff that Phil is involved in, and just the depth and breadth of his knowledge with like lore and things like that. It's quite impressive. Now, what I will say though is that we will have Phil on again. So if you didn't get enough of his exploits and everything like that, we will definitely be having him on again. He's also going to be helping us out in Sidewinder Syndicate's Colonia trip during the holiday season. So make sure you keep your calendars clear for that. But again, thank you, Phil, for coming on. MonoHive, great job with the interview. Top tier, stellar stuff there, fellas. But I think with that is going to do it for this episode of Algorab AM. I want to thank you very much for tuning in and listening, but also remember, share this show with your friends. As much as I love to sing the praises of Sidewinder Syndicate, we also want other commanders and other people in the elite community to get a hold of the show. So definitely share it with your friends outside the squadron. Hell, share it with people who don't even play elite. Maybe they'll find it interesting. But also, if you have questions or comments, concerns, complaints, hit us up in the different methods you can reach us, like the reviews section of your podcast player of choice. But with that, thank you very much for listening. Have an amazing week. Fly dangerously, Commanders. 07 out.